First, British police are anxious to find Manic Street Preachers guitarist Richey James, who has been missing for the past 2 weeks.
Hello and welcome to episode 2 of Between the Facts. In this episode we're looking at the life, disappearance and conspiracies around Richey Edwards. Richey was the guitarist in the Manic Street Preachers who disappeared in 1995. If we look at his early life, he was born Richard James Edwards on December 22nd, 1967 in a small town called Blackwood, which is near Caerphilly in Wales. It was evident from a young age that he was a sensitive, introspective individual, and that would go some way to shaping his creative mind and struggles as he became older and more productive. He was raised in a working class family. His parents were Graham and Sherry Edwards, and he had a younger sister, Rachel. By all accounts, a stable and loving upbringing, although Blackwood itself as a small mining town had some quite heavy economic struggles and was in decline, as was the whole of the Welsh mining industry. Edwards went to Oakdale Comprehensive School, where he excelled academically and was known for his love of literature and writing, and I think that literature and writing part comes very evident when you look at his lyrical work later on with the Manic Street Preachers. His passion for reading and analysing text was evident from a young age, and he developed a particular interest in existentialism and poetry. And again, you can see that coming through in the way he writes. Even as a child, Richey displayed an artistic and introspective side. He was a strong sense of individuality, often questioning societal norms, which he expressed through his writing and growing interest in music and art. It was while he was at Oakdale that he met the future Manic Street Preachers, so James Dean Bradfield, who would go on to be vocals, lead guitar, Sean Moore, drums, and Nicky Wire on bass and lyrics. This friendship would last throughout their educational career and bring them into the mid-80s where the band would be formed. Moving on to university, he studied at Swansea, where he graduated with a degree in 1989. It was at university that he developed this fascination with political theory and historical injustices. Again, themes that would be very pivotal to his writing style and output within the Manic Street Preachers. Although Richey wasn't initially a musician, he joined the band as a roadie and a graphic designer. His artistic skills and strong sense of aesthetics shaping the band's visual identity. Now, you've got to think that they're coming from a small Welsh provincial town where music wasn't one of the main selling points, but was an important way of reaching out and beyond, almost like an act of hope of breaking free of the constraints of the smaller area in which they lived in. His passionate and articulate personality earned him a more prominent role in the band's lyricist and rhythm guitarist, despite having minimal guitar playing ability at first. That's how some of the greats start, though, isn't it? You know, he might not have been the best guitarist when he started, but the Manic Street Preachers sound from the very, very start was very dependent on those two guitars playing in harmony and playing against each other. Edwards became known very, very quickly for his searing poetic lyrics and his almost like a mythical stage presence. I think one of the things that you'll notice about his stage presence, if you look back at the early Manic Street Preachers, it was evident that he was self-destructive, and I think this kind of feeds into the lyrics that he wrote, feeds into the myth of Richey Edwards. Along with that element of self-destructive, it was very, very, very obvious to people that he had emotional struggles. This layer of deep introspectiveness. he would pull himself away from those that loved him, those that wanted to support him. His fight with depression was real, self-doubt, and his feelings of alienation, and they all come out in the lyrics he wrote. It doesn't take a deep dive into early Manics works to see his lyrical style, and it's funny that when he disappeared in '95, the Manics almost immediately became a lighter band. Yes, there's still some strong emotional lyrics in some of the tracks from '95 onwards, particularly when they used lyrics that Richey had written before his disappearance. But they became a more anthemic, almost popular band, although they could never be called pop rock. Edwards crafted a distinctive public persona as an intellectual and provocateur, and there were many displays of self-harm, almost harking back to Sid Vicious with the Sex Pistols, where you'd have that. The cuts, the cutting, the bleeding, the public displays of self-destruction again. He would often engage with the media to challenge assumptions about rock music and society, carving the words "for real" into his arm in 1991 during an interview, which was, it's easy to look back now and see that as a cry for help as opposed to a display of art, which I think some people considered it to be at the time. I'm not sure that I would subscribe to body mutilation as art. I think I would say it was definitely a cry for help. He was always the most enigmatic member of the Manics. He was always the one that would outfox the interviewer. He was always the one that would do something that little bit more left field on stage. And I think that when we look back now, that we see him as that enigma, that we celebrate his raw honesty and his, I think literary brilliance is maybe a bit too strong, but his lyrics certainly had a weight and a power and a realism to them that would have a profound impact not only on the Manics legacy, but also on the fan base. The fan base is a very, very, very loyal one, and the Manics themselves, since when Richey was with them and since then, have changed their sound to some degrees, but their base has always stayed with them. I think it's worth taking a moment just to marry the public and musical persona of Richey Edwards to some of his lyrics. If we look back at tracks like 4 Stone 7 Pound from the album The Holy Bible, he's looking at the psychology of anorexia. I want to walk in the snow and not leave a footprint. I want to walk in the snow and not soil its purity. That talks about somebody who wants to be so light that they don't break the snow. It's incredibly painful, and it's quite chilling, because that is something that he struggled with, something that he saw a reality in. If we look at Faster, where he displays his innate ability to critique society and politics. I am stronger than Mensa, Miller and Mailer. I spat out Plath and Pinter. Jeez. Not only is that delivered by James Dean Bradfield at a pace and with a venom in, he's got I am. It's just a great line. It just shows that I've taken all of that in and just said, no, it doesn't work for me. If white America, again from the Holy Bible, complacent America, stolen land of Native Americans, it sounds very, very, very obvious to write that. But within the context of that album, is it insanely good? even when we look at the more commercially successful tracks from the Manic Street Preachers, look at Motorcycle Emptiness, which is just this almost like laughing at consumerism. But these lyrics, they juxtapose against the youthful rebellion, and it's like, under neon loneliness, motorcycle emptiness. You just think to yourself, why couldn't have I written that? That is just a beautiful, beautiful line. And finally, if we look at Die in the Summertime, there's a lot from the Holy Bible, but Die in the Summertime, scratch my leg with a rusty nail, sadly it heals, colour my hair, but the dye grows out. That's looking at his mental illness. That's looking at how, irrespective of how many times he fixes himself, it still comes back. And you're building up this image of somebody who so desperately wants to end that suffering, that cyclical nature of mental health, of depression, that he can write a line like that. It's thought that his last lyrics were for the Holy Bible, but they did actually find some more unused lyrics, which were, whilst not completed, did actually go into the Journal for Plagued Lovers album in 2009. So there's contributions to like a track called Peeled Apples and Facing Page, top left. The one thing that is missing from the Manics lyrics now is the rusty razor being dragged across the page instead of the pen. Yeah, but as fans we grow older as the band grows older, and some of us find peace and solace with our demons. Some of us carry our demons with us, and maybe it's okay that we don't have to have the same pain and suffering in every track of theirs. But he's definitely missed from a lyrical point of view and from a stage performance point of view. The Manics were much closer to a punk rock band than they are now, and yeah, it's they are who they are now because they had him. But it would have been nice to see where they'd gone with him. On February the 1st, 1995, Richey disappeared. Gone. No notes, no phone calls, no explanations, nothing. It's one of those cases that will forever be unresolved. He just disappeared. So what do we know about his disappearance? The last known sighting of Richey was at the Embassy Hotel in London on the morning of February the 1st. He was due to fly to the United States that day with James Dean Bradfield to start a promotional tour. But he just never showed up at the airport. Absolutely, yeah, never showed. 2 weeks later, on February the 14th, his car was found abandoned near the Severn Bridge. For anybody that knows the Severn Bridge, it's associated with suicide and suicide attempts. It's a hot spot, unfortunately. The police report noted that the car battery was dead, and reports suggested it had been there for several days. Well, I think the timeline would suggest 2 weeks. So, because there's so little information around his disappearance, what evidence can we piece together? What can we say about Richey's state of mind leading up to the 1st of February? We all know that he suffered with severe depression. Mixing that with his anorexia and his tendency for self-harming, then we saw this in all of his lyrics, and that adds to a mindset, doesn't it? So was there a catastrophic event, a breakdown, a decline in his ability to deal with those issues? In the weeks leading to his disappearance, friends and bandmates had noted that he was more withdrawn, but they didn't note any, alarming behaviour. We've seen this before, and people talk about people that actually commit suicide or plan to do, significant self-harm to themselves, don't always display overtly depressed or suspicious activity. Sometimes they seem happy. They seem slightly more outgoing than normal, almost as if having that plan of action is giving them a point to achieve, to move towards something that they wouldn't have if they were within their normal cycle of mental health episodes. So nothing strange there. Looking into his activities leading up to there, it was noted that Edwards had withdrawn £200 a day from his bank account. Nobody knows what that was for. The period of time, £200 a day. It was £2,800 that was withdrawn leading to his disappearance. It would be pure speculation to say he bought a plane ticket to Brazil and changed his name to Javier. Nobody knows. Some of Edwards' personal belongings, including receipts and photographs, were found in the car, but no note. And again, it's fairly typical for somebody that is planning to do something like this, to leave some mementos, to leave something to as a form of identity. Yes, it was me that was here. There has been nothing discovered about Richey since his disappearance. In November 2008, 13 years after his disappearance, he was declared presumed dead at the request of the family. Wow, what a terrible thing for the family to have to request of the courts, to have to process, to actually finalise. Yeah. Again, though, that legal step allowed for his estate to be settled, and 13 years of holding things in abeyance must have been incredibly difficult for them. And now we look at the conspiracies. What happened to Richey? The question that every single music fan wants answered, every Manic Street Preachers fan wants answered. The most obvious thing is that he unfortunately committed suicide, that he drove to the Severn Bridge, that he went up onto the bridge and that he jumped. And although no body was ever found, or there was no concrete evidence of this, it is not uncommon for suicides to occur at the Severn Bridge and for there to be no physical evidence afterwards. I think if you look at the evidence, some of it's circumstantial that sits around that, then I think it is more likely. And there's also the theory that he's still alive, that he did what people call a voluntary disappearance. You'll think of the J.D. Salinger, who didn't necessarily fake his own death, but he just chose to vanish and start somewhere else. I'm not overly convinced by that one. It's very romantic, that you might have the ability to hit a reset button in your life somewhere and say, "Oh, this is too much. Let's go somewhere." There's been claims of sightings of Edwards in Goa and the Canary Islands. There's been sightings all over, and I think that's almost like the Elvis Presley syndrome, isn't it? Everybody claims to have seen Elvis somewhere, and I think that when we miss somebody that we loved and we were affectionate about and that we cared about, that maybe we see them in things, or them in places when we want to see that we would want to share with them. I don't know. I think it'd be really nice to think that Richey had found some peace in his life with his struggles that he had. gone somewhere else and hit that reset, and that he was writing happy, heartwarming stories now, but I just don't think that was Richie's eventual outcome. We also get the conspiracies around foul play, that that he'd fallen in with the wrong group, that his drug use, that his mental health issues had taken him in the wrong direction, and somebody had, he'd fallen victim to foul play. Again, there is absolutely no evidence to support that. And I think that whilst, again, like him reinventing himself and starting somewhere else, it would be easier for us as fans to accept that he had been a victim of foul play, as opposed to somebody who had taken his own life and not left a note to explain. If we think about episode 1 and we think about Kurt Cobain left a note. Cobain left almost a narrative of where he was, how he was, and why he couldn't continue. And for Richie, somebody so well known for his lyrical prowess, not to leave something, that makes it so much more complicated to actually understand what he actually did. It would have been, I don't know, I think given his lyrical style and the way he wrote, I think his suicide note, in a very, very strange and very, very dark way, and I do apologise for this, but I wonder what he would have written. It certainly wouldn't have been something as plain and boring as "I've had enough." It would have been something that would have made people think and ponder and remember him. Yeah. When asked in an interview not long after Richie's disappearance if there was anything more that the band could have done, James Dean Bradfield responded, "Everyone can act with hindsight and say they could have done more, but there was a lot that was done, a lot that was being done. It was a complicated time." How painful must that be for a friend? Nicky Wire saying that he had probably blanked it out, that the band had told themselves he was writing about these dark things in a journalistic kind of way, writing from the point of view of an anorexic, and so much of our stuff was loaded in that way. The Holy Bible, the album that covered a lot of issues that Edwards suffered from, Wire said that he thought he was being a bit more vicarious about it than he was. I didn't assume that it was all about him. It was a very nihilistic album, infused with intent and ideas and observations. We did see a lot of dark introspection there, but he was looking outwards as well, and that sums up his style. So after Richie's disappearance, what happened to the Manic Street Preachers? So they continued as a three-piece, and in '96 released what has got to have been their most critically acclaimed and commercially successful album, Everything Must Go, which spawned a number of significant hits and includes my favourite Manic Street Preachers song of all time, A Design for Life. It was such a juxtaposition, though, against the previous album, the album that Richie had last worked on, which was The Holy Bible, an album full of self-loathing, self-hate, destruction, obviously, and lyrics so barbed and poisonous. But then Everything Must Go comes out and is, at times, a hopeful, triumphant album. And it's also an album that uses Richie's lyrics. Kevin Carter, which, it's a pop song, let's be honest about it. Lyrics by Richie. But then we go back to The Girl Who Wanted to Be God. Lyrics by Richie and Nicky Wire. You can see that symbiosis between them. The band has continued to go on, strength to strength to strength. Still together after all these years, still releasing albums, still shifting their political points of view across. Do they miss Richie as a band, as a as a live unit. Damn right they do. He added that fire, that passion that really, really ground them in and pushed them that little bit louder, that little bit faster. Apologies for the pun. It would have been great to see where they were now if he'd been around, but he's not. And, you know, he joined the 27 Club, like so many others, like Cobain from episode 1. So wherever you are, Richie, wherever happened to you, thanks for the great tunes that you gave us while you were around. Thanks for the great tunes that the band managed to create after you were there. To all the fans of the Manic Street Preachers, I'm one of you. You know, I want to be there with you every single gig. So that's the tale of Richey Edwards. Thanks for listening.